Welcome to Dragon Breath, a podcast that helps DMs far and wide, helping a podcast by DMs for DMs, helping you rid yourself of dreary dungeons and monotonous monsters. Each week, we're here to tackle a different mechanic, problem, or otherwise interesting idea that will make your next adventure great. My name, as one of your hosts, is Evan O'Hara, and as always, I am joined by my co-host, Christian Sanford.
Oh my
Christian, you
God,
want to
did
say
you
hello?
write that? That was so good. He did
I
not
wrote
share
it.
that with me at all, and I loved it.
I
Yes,
wrote
I'm
down a
your
little.
other host, Christian Sanford. And we are joined by two other players that we had in our last session. Do you guys want to quickly introduce yourselves?
Sure. My name's Ellen. I play Haka in the one-shot, which I'm sure will be introduced more fully in a minute. I am a DM and player. Actually, primarily do a lot more DMing than playing. And I was a big friend of Christian's. Christian's played with me before when he came out to visit in the big sunny LA. And I was really excited when I heard he was doing this. So I was
I'm Jeff. I am a friend of Evan's from high school and college. I have played D&D twice, two campaigns, I should say, this being my second one. I played Dennis, who I guess we'll introduce in a minute. But yeah, this was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, so these two players with us, if you haven't checked it out, feel free to check out our Twitch stream, which we will soon be posting. And also we do live streams on Saturdays at 2 p.m. typically, unless we note otherwise, in which we test out our different ideas, mechanics, or whatever we're exploring that weekend. Christian, do you want to maybe dip in, talk about what we did last week, and talk about the adventure that the gauntlet that you sent us through?
Absolutely. So I have always had sort of a hard time running sessions with monks. I just find that monks control combat inside and out. And if you as a DM don't absolutely clobber them or reel in their abilities, they will walk over every combat encounter you throw at them. So my idea was to run a quick 3 little encounters for our party and see if I could find ways to challenge the monks using their abilities, giving them an opportunity to, exemplify the things that are fun about monks, but also to create a combat encounter that feels life-threatening and that feels dangerous, because I feel like sometimes monks just feel immortal. I'm just going to stun lock you until you do whatever. And this came from, just real quick background, I went to one of those like board game shops where they let people just like run, and you basically pay $10 to sit at a DM's table and you play the one shot or whatever that they bring, and I got a discount at the store or whatever. I think I bought a dice tray. Anyways, I was there, and I ended up having 2 monks in my party, and the first couple parts of the encounter were really great. I thought it was really dynamic, and then they got to the big bad, and the big bad got 1 action off, and it failed. So it was like a wisdom save that the player made, and then my big bad had no other actions before it died. So it's one of those things where I was just so frustrated that the monks somehow clobbered me. So in this, I set up that we were doing a tournament, and the monks were going to go through the gauntlet to represent and show what's new about their martial arts or whatever. They entered the trials, and their first trial was a long path of water that was filled with several water elementals while they were being shot at with magical darts. They quickly realized that the machines shooting the darts disabled the water elementals, and they were able to, because they're monks at level 9, run across the water, which I just thought was cool. The whole reason I had you guys at level 9 was just so that I could see you guys run across water. And then there was a second encounter that we didn't actually have time for, that we kind of had to skip over, and that was going to be more or less a puzzle combat encounter with a couple of helmed horrors. So helmed horrors are one of 2 creatures that have a stun immunity. So if you're a DM looking for a creature to mix up your party, it has a lot of resistances, so you have to be careful how you throw it at your party. It doesn't have a ton of hit points, but the fact that it's immune to stun is a great way to mess with monks. So you guys weren't able to fight that, and you guys moved to a big bad fight, and I thought it would be interesting, what could beat a couple level 9 monks? How about a level 17 monk? Unfortunately, this is where things, I think, on my end went a little wrong. I think so. This monk, this was a homebrewed class that I had found online. Oh man, I should have seen. While we're talking, I'm gonna look up the credited homebrew for this so that I can drop the appropriate credits here. But it was based off of the hit show Avatar: Last Airbender, and you guys basically fought someone who was supposed to be the Avatar, but only really got to cast one spell and make maybe 2 attacks before you guys put him to sleep. And then after that, the other technique that I had was swarming monks. Monks sometimes can get overwhelmed with too many units, but Jeff's subclass seemed to handle that pretty well. And we'll talk about that. But I would love to hear from the players now. That's just some sort of background to give you an idea of what we played through. But more importantly, as every DM knows, it's did the players have fun? What did you guys think?
Take it away, Jeff.
I had fun. I think I've never played a monk. I've only played a druid before.
Cool.
So I was a little overwhelmed with the amount of things that I could do. In every
Sure. What
turn.
did you think of that? Yeah, like as a new player, when you were handed, because this is something that Evan and I talked about before we ran the sessions, knowing that you were a little bit of a newer player, could you handle all of the features of a monk? I think you did very well. Yeah, you did. By the way, as a player, as sort of a newer player, you handled everything so well. But how was that experience having all of that feature?
It was interesting. I think if I would have played a monk like up to level 9, like if I would have like started at a lower level, I think I would have gotten used to it a lot more. But I had like a cheat sheet in front of me of like the different, like second attack, bonus attack, like all the stuff that I could do, and it got a little overwhelming, but I think it was okay. I will say if I were a monk again, I would avoid water at all costs, because every time I water, I immediately
Yeah, I think you got knocked into the water. I think you rolled a nat 1 and tripped into the water as well. Yes. I mean, I don't know, those are monk specific. I think you just had some mean dice that day.
Yeah. But was there a point, was there a specific point where you're like, wow, I got no idea what's going on?
No, I pretty much had a good grasp on it. There's just, I guess, for me, it was the bonus actions. There's so many of them.
as a DM, yeah, I'm sure it was overwhelming. But as we sort of presented things to you, and for our listeners at home, within Roll20, I gave our players handout character sheets that provided them with all of their roles, so they didn't have to do any math or really check their character sheets. And I had listed for them all of their features plus a cheat sheet for general action economy. Was there like something else that you feel would have been helpful to have known maybe beforehand going into it?
I don't think so. I do think I would have liked to have researched the subclasses, I think, a bit more. I just chose one that I like the name of, which ended up working out in my favor in the end. But I think, Alan, the one that you chose, I thought was really interesting because of the long range attacks.
Yeah. I intentionally, I was playing a Kensai Monk, a half-orc Kensai Monk that was also strength-based. I intentionally tried to make, not that Kensai is very, very strange, but making them strength-based I thought was a little bit odd, off the wall. And then Kensai, I know, really even though it doesn't have magic in the traditional sense, I think it really breaks the mold of a monk more than some of the other ones do, just because it has ranged weapons. You can also use, I had a warhammer and a longbow, and those attacks count as magical, which really just breaks the mold on the way you would prep for a monk, which was really interesting, because I feel like that the proof was in the pudding during the encounters. Because, for instance, the magical crystals in the first encounter in the long tunnel I thought it was so clever the way that Christian set it up, where we, as monks, traditional monks, you have to punch them with your fist to have a magical attack against them, which means you have to break contact with the water, potentially then falling beneath the water where you are then vulnerable to water elementals. That was brilliant, but put a monk who has a longbow in the party and those attacks are also magical. 2 hits per crystal and those things go out.
Yeah, I want you to know, behind the curtain, my idea designing it was that it was because the darts that were being fired were magical. So if you had used your deflect missile, or where you can throw it back, the idea I had was that you would be running and you could kind of run and gun and toss them back. But then once you're like, I can make range attacks, they're monks' weapons and they're also magical, I was like, oh, that would Yeah, that would do it. So there's actually kind of a funny moment. If you go back and watch the stream, Ellen, you'll see that I type in my notes. I literally have just made up the DC and hit points for these Jeffs.
Now, Jeff and Ellen, I'm curious to you guys. Like on the DM side, Christian always says that he thinks that the monks are very overpowered. On the side of the players, do you think you like felt the same way? Did you think that you were like ripping through? Like as the monk, or did you feel like more nervous, or like how did you feel about that?
Great question.
I'll take it first. I felt Haka was ripping through. I don't know if that was necessarily
okay. So the rest
I had I had no idea.
Well, and I
don't
mean that as an insult to anyone, because I feel like we all played very smart the way our characters were built. But I truly feel like the encounters were built for close combat monks, and because Haka was working range, she barely came in contact with anything the entire combat. And it felt like, I mean, I used most of my key points. I never took any damage. So it felt in that way, I was like, well, these encounters like weren't designed for somebody working at range, which is why I did that. I intentionally was like, I want this to be something that will test the system, that like test Christian's theory.
Yeah.
So I felt like that character did, but I don't necessarily feel like she's overpowered. If there had been things to force her into melee, that would have been a very dangerous. If she had been forced into melee with those fire water snakes that came up, that would have been really bad. Also, when we were fighting the Avatar, I was at a certain point thinking, you know, Haka might just have to run up there and get into melee because he has deflect missiles just like I do. So these arrows are useless. Like, he's not going to take any damage. I'm essentially just distracting him, and I can only really hit him when he's stunned, because otherwise he's just going to deflect missiles.
I will say, I think that was one of my favorite parts of the entire session. When you shot him, he used his reaction to deflect missiles, send it back to you, but then you reflected it back to him. That was, I think, like the most like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon bullshit that we did the entire time, and I loved it. Jeff, what about you? What did you think about your sort of power level going through the adventure?
I don't feel like it came in handy until the very end. I felt like I was struggling. I was the first like session. I immediately found the water, and I spent most of it literally swimming away from the water element. For no reason.
See, Jeff, you experienced the encounter as I designed it. And I want Ellen that like bringing. That's exactly why we want to invite DMs and novice players to these encounters, because you're gonna think about it that way. That's so cool to me that you were like, all right, I know. At like a DM preparing against a DM, that's so cool. Like I do think the second encounter probably would have challenged you a little bit more, because it would have been. Like Evan and I talked about this, I think, after you had left.
I was so mad. My Shadow Monk would have.
Yeah, that would have been. We just didn't have time for it, and that's. But like, maybe just talking about this too for other DMs to give them ideas is like I had created sort of a close combat encounter. If you do have a monk that uses ranged, suddenly you have creatures that can use half cover because they're attacking around corners. So that way, you can block line of sight. You can take away the monk's vision. And how cool is that to be like a monk fighting in the dark and shit? That's super fun. Trying to think of what else we can. Oh, also another thing, just for our DMs at home listening, the fire snakes that they're talking about are a creature. They're called fire snakes. They're considered young salamanders, which are like the fire salamanders in the monsters and in the monster manual. As babies, they have a much lower challenge rating, and they still do damage when hit, which is a really cool way to challenge melee characters. Is to if they're going to risk just blindly attacking every turn, they'll be taking damage for it. So maybe your players will find creative ways to not directly touch the creatures they're fighting, which can be fun.
I will say, I think when we talk about like ripping through too, I think that the monk has a sort of like system to it that it is a very resource heavy, or like what I always like to call like very resource heavy sort of build, right? The idea that to do most cool things that you do as a monk require a key point, right? Mm-hmm. And I think the expenditure of your key points across a one shot is very different than like how you use them in a full campaign, right? Like if I go into my normal Wednesday night campaign and I'm a monk, right? I don't know necessarily if I'm going to be in like heavy combat or something. So I felt like when we were at the end and Jeff and I were flanking the Avatar, we were just releasing as many flurry of blows because we're like, this is the end, and if we don't kill him, he's going to kill us. It was this like mad dash of like trying to hit this 20 AC and always like just like missing by like the skin of our teeth, right? I think that there is, in the one shot, I think people are a little bit more fast and loose with their key points, which I think make the monk a much more dangerous or helpful, depending on which side you are, like character within a one shot versus maybe a long form campaign.
Yeah, I do also think I kind of botched playing the character because then again I got stun locked. And I would love to hear Alan's perspective on this too. Like, do you have any like when monks, because again, like at least this is how I see it, monks can control combat by stunning targets, by knocking them prone, by having such high mobility. As a DM, I made one mistake, and that mistake was basically not stunning you, because I probably could have stunned both of them and then moved to attack Haka, but because I was stun locked so long, you just ran the encounter. So I don't know, Ellen, is there something that like you would approach that from a DM's perspective?
Well, I do have a monk in my long campaign party.
Yes, please
and
talk
I also
about
have
that.
Yes, I do. They are a wear 4 elements, so pretty similar to what Evan was playing, but I believe you were playing a different race than that.
I was actually playing a shadow monk, skills that
Yeah,
literally never came into play, but still managed to do enough. That's the other thing. The core abilities of the monk are badass in and of themselves.
That's where, and I designed the encounter just based off of those core abilities.
Yeah, which was actually very interesting. Which of us used our subclass abilities versus or relied on subclass abilities versus core abilities? I was relying mainly on subclass abilities as a Kensai, and I feel like that's also true for Jeff. I might be incorrect, but then Evan, you said you only use your core abilities.
Yeah, I don't think the Shadow Monk requires there to be darkness, which is why that second encounter I think would have been a little bit more interesting in the least in showcasing the Shadow Monk. But that's what I'm saying. Like, even though I didn't get a chance to show that side of the character, I still had so much to do as just a like monk, period. You know what I mean? There is like so much there to do, like walk on water and do flips and punch things like super hard. Like, it's absolutely great.
Yeah. So for your question about challenging monks, now I have the one monk in my party. I believe they're about level 7 right now. So not quite as high as what we were playing. And the main thing it seems that can come up with the monks is the stun lock, because it disables the enemy for an entire round. I think a lot of the stuff that Christian, that you did, was brilliant. Swarming, making them do damage on contact in a melee situation was genius. Making us break contact with the water to disable water walk was very smart. Making it impossible, like you need to have a magical attack against the thing at range. I think all of that was really well set up. The only thing I can, for general in the campaign, I do think that designing encounters against monks where it is not one central big bad and nothing else helps you a lot, because if you only have them fighting one big bad and that big bad gets stunned, there is nothing, the entire enemy side is locked down. But if you have a central big bad and then several accessory monsters, those guys can keep attacking even if the monk is dealing with the big bad, which can cause, which could then also help to distract the monk by if the other party members start getting into danger.
So like backlining the party, like let the monk, if the monk's going to be their front line engaging with the big bad, you can flank them. You can flank your party with other enemies. Okay, that's interesting.
I think
real quick, how are we doing on time?
We're at 18 minutes right now.
We're at 18 minutes. Okay, cool.
And then, sorry, the last thing I want to say on that is that I think you mentioned there's only like 2 creatures that are immune to stun. I'm a huge fan of, I think Christian mentioned that. I think I am a huge fan of just add that ability. Just customize a creature a little bit. Just if you're really worried about that as a DM and you're like, every single thing I shoot at these people has stun, is getting stunned and there's nothing I can do. I was like, okay, well add freedom, like a freedom of movement ability or whatever you want to call it, immunity to stun to some other random creature. Like, what, you know what? Your Bahir is now immune to stun because they have extra thick hide and they don't have the same nervous structure, so it
They have
doesn't work.
Well, like
raddest
create a world
six-pack you've ever
connection.
seen.
Yeah,
like,
they
create
have
a
just
world
the
connection
best.
that gives them a reason to be immune to stun. That's fun too.
Yeah,
I
I
think-
mean, it's not a huge crazy thing to add. That monster will probably still go down, but at least that monster's still getting to do things in the combat.
Before we move on to our final part of the episode, I do kind of want to check in with Jeff again about, your general impressions with monks now that you've sort of listened to us talk about it. Like, what parts of the monk did you really enjoy as a new player? Like what parts, because again, as DMs, we're always trying to like give our players opportunities to feel cool while playing. So like, what did you feel the coolest doing while you were the monk?
I think because I've only played a druid, and usually, it's like attack, most likely miss or something.
Sure.
Being able to do that much damage, I think, in a round, or have that chances to do damage in a round, it was a lot different for me in my perspective, and I enjoyed it a lot.
Do you play your druid as a spellcaster or as a tank using wild shape?
As a spellcaster, usually.
So yeah, how is that player experience different for you? Switching from a spellcaster to a more martial or melee character.
Well, I was kind of, in a way, it was similar because whereas I didn't have spell slots to expend, you have the key points, so it's still like a resource that you have to expend carefully. But I just feel like the capability for damage was a lot higher. I also think it's interesting because monks can't really heal themselves in a normal setting, especially when you're doing a one shot with all monks. I was worried that we were just going to get knocked out right away because nobody could heal anybody. Which is one of the reasons why I liked the long dead monk, because I was hoping that you would have some sort of situation where you would swarm us, and then you can that subclass can gain HP or gain hit points.
Seriously, Jeff, as a new player to think like that, that's really awesome, by the way.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think with this, I think we're about ready to maybe move on to what we're thinking about next time for our next adventure, which is what I will be running. And Jeff and Ellen, I would love some input on maybe things that you guys have done with the past with this sort of subject matter, or maybe like Jeff, especially what you would sort of expect in this sort of a scenario. So I am a big fan of a lot of games like, Zelda or Shadow of the Colossus, where you fight massive enemies, right? And I also think that one of my favorite enemies in the entire monster manual is the giants. I think the storm giant especially is like the coolest thing. Like, I think it's absolutely awesome in concept. But every time I have twice ran adventures where I had my players fighting giant enemies, and I have failed to make it like interesting. I don't know how this idea of having this story's high being be a reasonable fight when it's like the simplest idea is to like, I'm just gonna hit him in the ankles again, right? Because that's what's there. So sort of trying to like play with those ideas to sort of emanate those sort of Legend of Zelda or The Shadow of Colossus, like where there is maybe other more to use tactics to better address this situation. So I don't know, like Ellen, have you ever run anything with like larger enemies in before?
Yes, so I have run one combat encounter with a hill giant, and because my characters are not quite high level, and I actually have a huge custom brew for giants. I have a giant I have a ranger in my party, and one of their original favorite enemy is giants. So
Okay.
I've been doing a lot of thinking about giants. I'm a huge fan of the Shadow of the Colossus method, where it's giants. You can't just do 200 hit points to their ankle and then they die. Like breaking it down into parts, saying you have to get them down on their knees and you have to be able to get to their neck before you're even doing effective damage. I think increasing their movement speed is a great thing to do. If it's huge, maybe it's moving like 120 feet per round. Just a single footfall is making it move that far. I also am a huge fan of giants are huge, because if you look into the ordning, which is the system of law, the giant hierarchy set but down by what's his name? I forget his name, but like the giant god. making it that, you know what, giants are physically bigger the higher up that ordning they are. So storm giants are a mile tall, not like 40 feet, a mile,
Huge.
a full mile
All
tall.
right.
So making a big part of the combat, like, well, how do you even do effective damage to a creature of that size?
Gotcha. Yeah, I don't know if for the sake of running a one shot I can make it a mile high, but I enjoy the concept of it being bigger than what the the DMG or whatever says it is.
Yeah.
I've run oh, sorry, Alan, go ahead.
I was going to say another system, instead of breaking the hit points down into areas, you can give them damage thresholds like a boat, where it's like if you're not doing more than 50 points of damage with that attack, it's barely scratching the surface. It doesn't even record the damage against the hit points.
That's interesting too.
Mm-hmm.
Jeff, going into an adventure maybe where you knew you were going to fight something larger. Let's say that you were using Corny, your druid from our other campaign, right? Like you're going into that situation. Like, what is your expectation as a player?
What are you mechanically thinking that you could do against a creature that large with your current skill set in that character?
I would feel like it would be a lot of range attacks, which I don't know if Corny would be very good at, because if it is that big and you're trying to get it, up on the neck or like the head area to do effective damage, I feel like I would be struggling to figure that out with Corny anyway.
Word. Okay.
The one I have run one shot where I had them fight a storm giant, and I did kind of retweak things, but the way I'd made it is I had made it a hunting party. So it was only a party of like, I think 3 or 4, and then they were with a hunting party of like 20 individuals. So that way, like a whole village, like they know like the setup was a crazed giant has come down from the mountains and is going to destroy their village. It's on its way. We have to rise and fight to it. And like the party, like having a giant swipe, a whole like line of men in one hit is really cool too. Like that could be devastating to see, a whole village has come out to slay this giant and it just clobbered 7 dudes in one hit.
The crowd NPCs on your side are one of my favorite narrative devices of communicating, giving you enough time to think through your actions while also communicating how dangerous the thing you are about to fight is. Like, I'm not going to hurt you until 20 NPCs are dead, but that should also communicate to you that this is a dangerous situation.
Yeah, seeing the damage, like creatures this big, for me as a player, I need to see like what kind of damage it can do, like to see the wake of what it helps me as a player gauge how I need to prepare for it. Like if I saw this creature destroyed an entire town and I'm following it, okay, that maybe I shouldn't run into it head on.
Absolutely. Isn't there actually a feat or something that it might be a
giant
fighter
slayer
ability?
There's definitely giant slayer
hunter.
in the ranger.
Yeah,
like
hunter ranger.
Yeah.
I was talking about it's the sweeping attack where if you do damage to kill a creature, and you have overflow damage that then carries on to the creature next to it or within 5 feet of it.
So that's a translation of a 3.5 feet called cleave, where you would go through one and then go to the other. Now I think like Christian said, I think it's in the hunter subclass that you use. Now it's definitely nerfed from what it used to be, but if you kill a creature, you can use your reaction to then use or bonus action or something to attack something within 5 feet of that creature.
Yeah. Because you could do something like that with giants too. If they're doing, that's a great way to turn the mechanic when they kill a whole town of people and sweep them off the map. Looking at it mechanically, that could be an interesting way to do it. Or just treating their weapon attacks like an area of effect, like a dragon.
I want to do that with the rocks. Every giant has a rock to throw, and I love the idea of approaching the giant and having to sweep left and right as these like boulders fly through the air, which is that's a giant specific.
Also,
thing.
I mean, giants can bring down mountains, right? You can create environmental effects too that the party has to deal with. Suddenly, the giant has stomped the ground, and it's difficult terrain immediately around it. Or it literally has uprooted a tree and is swinging that. Yeah, that's cool. I'm pumped for this, Evan. I think this is gonna be really cool.
I'm very excited. On that note, we are approaching our time limit. So Jeff and Ellen, thank you so much for joining us, both in the adventure and, following us here again for the discussion. It's really helpful having, again, both these perspectives in there. And you guys were an absolute joy to have on the show. Thank you for coming on.
And tune in this coming Saturday
Yes.
at 2 p.m. if you would like to. A Saturday, so that for people tuning in later, this Saturday refers to July 11th at 2 p.m. on our Twitch, which is Dragon Breath PC. Believe, right? Did I get that right?
Yes, that is correct. We'll edit this if it's not. It'll just come in and be like
just a real awkward
Dragon Breath.
Well, any other final thoughts from our guests today? It was so nice having you.
I loved being here. It was so much fun, and I hope I get an invite back at some point.
Oh my gosh, Ellen!
Right.
Yes, we will totally
certainly.
invite you back again. We will have you on the show soon.
Great.
Oh,
Yeah, thanks for having us, guys.
of course. We're
Absolutely.
glad to have
Evan,
you.
you wanna send us out?
I'll send us out. Thank you for tuning in, and come back again to fix your dragon breath.